Welcome to the Empowerment Show, a podcast designed to empower women like you to take control of your lives, make informed decisions, and redefine success on your own terms, beyond the noise of influencer culture.
Hello. Welcome to another episode of the EmpowHER podcast show. Matthew's going to kill me because I use a different name every time.
Every time.
I'm getting it together, I promise.
I love it.
But tonight we have a really fun guest. Her name is Ebony Twilley Martin. She is a very good friend of mine. She is a climate justice leader, and she is the former co-executive director of Greenpeace USA. And, Ebony is an environmental justice leader. She was the first Black woman to lead a major international environmental NGO in the US. And that is actually kind of how I heard about her. One of my friends was like, I know this incredible Black woman. You got to meet her. She is like the only Black executive director of a major nonprofit. And I was like, yeah, I got to meet her. And we absolutely hit it off. She's absolutely incredible. But tonight we want to have a conversation about what happens when climate justice clashes with what a person like Ebony is trying to do with an organization like Greenpeace, and there ends up being some kind of legal battle. And this is something that faces nonprofits quite a bit. And I think it's something that nonprofits are going to see more things like what happened to Greenpeace. And we will jump into it. So thank you, Ebony, for joining us tonight. We're really excited to have this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to it. I enjoy your podcast, so I'm so happy to just be a part of the community.
All right. Well, talk about how you got started with climate justice work. I know you've had some personal experience and then looking at it from really the social justice angle. What do environmental climate issues, how do they in particular affect people of color? Because I know that's kind of how you came into this.
Mm-hmm. So my background, actually, I went to school for music, and I was a vocal major and used to sing for the Philadelphia Philharmonic Orchestra Choir. That did not pay the bills.
I did not know this.
Yes.
Adama, I feel like all of your friends are just full of fun facts.
I know. I love that for me.
Well, that is a little known fact. So that didn't pay the bills. So I had to move back to Maryland with my parents. And at that time, I was a single mom. I had my son, who was about 3 or 4 years old at the time. And he began to develop respiratory issues. And so I took him to the doctor, and I expected her to ask me questions about my family's medical history. But instead, she asked where I lived and if I was surrounded by anything with nature, grass, trees, butterflies, any of that. And I told her, actually, no, I live in an apartment building in between 2 major highways. And so she said, well, your son has asthma, and it's likely environmentally induced. And when we actually looked at the data in Landover, Maryland, the air quality was pretty poor. So he wasn't the only child suffering from asthma. And so this kind of shook me to my core, because what do you give a kid when they can't breathe? If they have a headache or a cold, you give them Robitussin, headache, Motrin. What do you do when your child can't breathe? So that really hit me to my core. And so as I began to research, I learned that Black and brown children are disproportionately impacted by asthma. And I learned that the single biggest predictor of pollution in the area is race. It's not your income. Yeah, it's not your income. It's not your property value. It's race.
Predictor of pollution.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay. I would love to dig into that, but continue.
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty simple. Where can you pollute?
Yeah.
And who won't complain?
That's what I wanted to dig
whose
into.
complaints will not
You
be
know what?
listened to.
Whose complaints matter? Yeah.
And where do they put the major highways?
Yeah. Bingo.
Where
in our
that goes back to
yeah.
redlining and gentrification 101.
Zap.
You're like, what?
Yep.
These highways that are our yard. They're like, girl, I know we put them there on purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
We knocked down your grandma's house and we put that freeway there.
Yep. So, yeah, actually, people of color are 2.4 times more likely to be exposed to heavy pollution. And so it sent me on a journey. And I said, I wanted to do something to impact or to make change.
Mm-hmm.
And also at the time I was getting my master's in human resources and had a knack for finding talent, especially leadership, and also developing it. And so I saw an opening at Greenpeace US. And so I said, this is my opportunity to really dive into the environmental space. And I was so fortunate because at Greenpeace, it's a global organization. So my introduction into the climate movement was from a global perspective. So I was able to work with frontline communities throughout the global South as well as in our country. And I saw the impacts of climate change, and I was able to then, basically start that work in a number of different ways, whether it was creating strategies internally or hiring the folks that created the strategies externally. So that's kind of how I found my way into the climate movement. And that was about 12 years ago now.
You're alluding to something which I think is a common theme on this show, which is intersectionality. And a lot of people think about things like the environment or race and everything in between as like single issues, right? And you're talking about how, all of these things connect. And it's a testament to who you are as a person that you sought to actually take all those like interdependent experiences and make a career out of them. Not a lot of people do that. So hats off to you.
Well, thank you. Leah Thomas actually coined the phrase intersectional environmentalist. And she did that because she said our identity shapes how we experience the environment. And because of, like you said, everything's connected. The base causes of pollution connect us to health. When you think about climate migration, that connects you to immigration. When you think about gender justice, you also have to think about gender equity because women are also more likely to be impacted by the climate crisis because of the inequalities that exist. So it's all full circle. All of it, the root causes is from extraction and exploitation and treating people like they're expendable. So it's all connected, and it is an intersectional issue.
Can you talk a bit about your work? What, you came into this line of work. What did you find once you entered it? A lot of people who go into like climate justice, social justice, economic justice, whatever, they're like, I'm going to go change the world. And then they're so disappointed by how many barriers that do that. So can you talk about, maybe it was great. Maybe it was easy. Highly doubt it. But can you just talk about like what that was like?
Yeah, you're right. You go in, fired up, ready to go, and you hit that first brick wall and you're like, oh, wait, let's rethink that. So when I got into the organization, one thing, and even really the broader movement, what I found was many folks didn't look like me. And although Black and brown people are disproportionately impacted, we weren't the ones sitting at the tables or making any decisions or even being given resources to fight this crisis. And so what I wanted to do was to ensure that the people who were impacted actually had a seat at the table, and not just a seat at the table, but a seat at the decision-making table. And so what I did was go on a journey to, we called it embedding justice at Greenpeace. And what I did was look at everything from the systems, the processes, everything having to do with the culture, and wanted to ensure that the foundation of it was all equitable. And so that took me on a journey to change everything from the hiring practices to promotion to compensation, to even policies that had to do with health benefits, even around who got opportunities to go to trainings, who got opportunities to go to the global meetings. You would be surprised how inequity pops up in these little areas, and then how that impacts someone's career or even someone's outcome in a number of ways. So young people they're like, really? What? I didn't think of that.
So sadly, this crew is far too familiar with that dynamic.
Yeah. So by the time when I started Greenpeace, it was 13% Black, Indigenous people of color. By the time I left, it was 57%. And also leadership, I believe, was 6%. And by the time I left, it was 47%. So 10 years of work, 10 years of sowing seeds, watering them, even when the ground looked like nothing was coming up. And sooner or later, the sprouts started to come up, and it was a beautiful, diverse garden. And it's something that I'm extremely proud of.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. Can you talk a bit about, right now we're at an interesting time in America where companies getting involved in causes that could be perceived as controversial or, whatever the perception may be, they're pulling back. Can you talk a bit about like the donor environment and how you navigated that in the nonprofit sector? Because, that's a tumultuous space to be in.
It is. And that's a really good question. Even in the context of what we're experiencing now, how everyone is pulling back. But the sad thing is, like, diversity, it's a good business case. Like, it makes most businesses prosper. Studies show diversity. Studies show. So I'm like, what? Like, why are y'all I don't quite understand, but okay. But what I had to do was like kind of meet donors where they were, understand their concerns, understand what they valued, and then try to shape our strategy around that, or not even our strategy, but even the way in which we communicated with them. And just explaining to them, like I just said, all of these issues are intersectional. And you won't win the climate crisis if you don't have people of color involved. Like the demographics show, we are already the global majority. And in this country, I think it's 4 out of 5, I believe. So like, if you really are committed to ensuring that we all have clean water and we all can breathe clean air, you have to do it with equity and justice as a foundation. It's not a nice to add on. It has to be the bedrock. And so some of the donors, like it, you just had to take them on a journey. And then also, one thing that we benefited in is because, like I said, Greenpeace is a global organization, and many of them loved the fact that they were donating to global causes. It kind of, okay, you want to help the folks in the Philippines. That's justice. See, you're already doing it.
Right.
Like, oh.
Right. But it was the packaging that for them.
It was, yeah. And how you discuss it.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and we're even looking at like even how we discuss it now. I am with an organization called Multicultural Leadership Initiative, and what we're trying to do is to create a global coalition to fight the climate crisis. And one way in which we're even talking about it, because DEI is a red herring now. We're just talking about culturally and linguistically diverse people and different regions of the world. And it's really the same thing. But if you want me to call it this to make you feel better, okay. So, yeah, but that's I think that's how we're even speaking about it, because we can't not do the work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like that's where most corporates are at. Like, we might call it something different, but we're still trying to make sure that our people feel good coming to work, that they feel safe, that they feel heard, that they feel like they can come to work and bring their best self to work. And if you do not have anyone else at the company or on your team or around you that looks remotely like you, it makes those things more difficult. And everybody knows that. Besides that, all the research shows your products are better when they reflect your actual customer base, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not rocket science.
No, it really is not. And we're in a crazy moment in time. But, well, thank you for the work that you were doing. So let's fast forward a little bit. So you were at the organization for about 12 years. In 2016, Greenpeace and some other entities were sued by Energy Transfer Partners, the company behind the Dakota Access Pipeline. You probably, if you're listening, you probably remember this. This was a huge to-do for defamation and racketeering tied to the Standing Rock protests. And after years in court, a federal judge in 2024 ordered Greenpeace USA to pay more than $600 million. That figure has left the organization facing mass layoffs and the real prospect of bankruptcy. And for many in the climate movement, it was kind of a watershed moment because not just for Greenpeace, but for advocacy in the U.S. more broadly. The timing obviously couldn't be worse. This administration, the current administration, is moving very quickly to weaken EPA, roll back environmental protections, and scale back climate enforcement, with one of the country's largest green groups sidelined by litigation. The fight against those rollbacks has become even more difficult. And when I look at this, and I'm going to ask you just to, because Greenpeace was hit with a SLAPP lawsuit. And if you could just give us a little bit of an idea about what that means, what a SLAPP lawsuit is, because I know that's something you're very familiar with and that you've seen before. But to me, when I look at this lawsuit, it really, it gives a roadmap for how other organizations that do not like protests, that do not like, any kind of adverse activity, it gives a roadmap for how they can go after them as well. And the climate, not the weather climate, but the, ecosystem climate is really stacked against orgs like this. So I think for nonprofits, this really is something that this lawsuit and the judgment really made people sit up and look around and realize, like, we're in a very, very fraught moment. So can you explain what a SLAPP lawsuit is, and then we'll get into your thoughts on this.
Okay. Yeah. SLAPP lawsuits are, they're called SLAPPs, and that's short for strategic lawsuits against public participation. And what it is a way to weaponize the judicial system against advocacy organizations or against anyone that speaks out or pushes back on a corporation or company's agenda. We've seen them in Alabama. We've seen them in California. They're popping up more prevalently. There are also a lot of laws being passed now over the last few years, really, to push back against protests and actually criminalize it. And also specifically criminalizing it when it has to do with any infrastructure with oil and gas specifically. So if a company says they want to put a gas oil line or refinery in your neighborhood, and you go to protest against it, in certain states, it's against the law to even do that.
Wow.
Yes. So it's really an attack on your First Amendment rights.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we're seeing this, this type of lawsuit. And the purpose of it is to, of course, silence the organization, but also to tie you up in so much litigation that it takes you away from your mission, and you're spending all of your money fighting this instead of actually that cause or the mission of the organization. So it's a very unfortunate, evil practice that's
So, when you, as the executive director of an organization, you do have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the organization stays solvent, can continue their mission. How do you think about things like this?
I'm not going to make any comments about the case because they are still in active litigation. But what I can speak to is how I make decisions in these types of situations, as the organization has faced these types of lawsuits in the past as well. This wasn't the only SLAPP lawsuit that they faced. So I look at the case or the situation through an extensive risk framework or analysis. And I kind of take into account everything, including the historical context, the alignment with the mission, whatever the case is about, is it aligned with our mission, our principles, our priorities, even how we found ourselves in this situation, the purpose of the attack. If it is an attack, is it to silence the organization or is it to destroy the organization? I look at if we can mitigate any risk. I look at the stakeholders involved. I look at who we're responsible for, who we're responsible to. And then, as you said, like our fiduciary responsibility to not only our donors, but our staff, our partners. And in our case, Greenpeace is a part of a global network. So much of the money that we fundraised in the U.S. was sent back to the global organization and dispersed to our offices in the global South for those who couldn't fundraise or those who didn't bring in as much revenue as our office. So I look at those impacts and also the precedents that it would set. And then weigh all of those things. And as you said, my goal as executive director or in any leadership role is to ensure the solvency of the organization and that it lives to carry out its mission. So that's the way I look at things.
Yeah, and I think that that's, something that's very tough because as I look at this, a $600 million judgment against a nonprofit, it's game over. I mean, you're now trying to figure out, can you keep anybody? What can you kind of preserve through bankruptcy? How much of the mission can you keep going? And I mean, I can't even imagine then how I know, as you were leaving, I saw a letter that the Global Org wrote and was, asking a lot of questions because you were no longer attending global meetings. And they do look to the US org to help them with their initiatives and to fund those initiatives. And so, I think you no longer being there, them not seeing you where they expected to see you as all of this is going on in the background, it was clear that the global org was very disturbed by this. And so I know, you and I have had many conversations, and I know that, you loved being there. You loved the issues. You loved working on all of those things. So for you to leave, and especially for you to leave when the organization is in the middle of such a devastating event that changes how they are going to be, operating moving forward, I know that was really difficult. And, we don't need to belabor all of that, but to me, not having you there is a real loss. And I know the international orgs felt the same. And, I think one of the things as we talk about a SLAPP lawsuit, I think one of the things that's really difficult for nonprofits, and I think it's something that a lot of nonprofits are going to have to really come to terms with, movements and campaigns love fight language, right? Fight, fight, fight. Hell no, we won't go. And movements tend to use fiery language, want to fight, but courts don't work that way, right? Mm-hmm. So, in your mind, as you are, when you were an executive director, how did you kind of balance those things, making sure that you were still taking the fight to whoever's doorstep, but trying to keep it in a lane that would keep you out of a lawsuit? What advice would you give to other nonprofits as they're trying to kind of navigate some of those same challenges?
Excellent question. And actually, I've been supporting a lot of organizations over the last few months in building their resilience, because we all know what this administration's goals are, and they conflict with ours. So I've been working with a lot of organizations, helping them to think this through. And these situations are emotionally charged. And as you said, I think a lot of advocacy organizations and activist groups love to use this language because it intensifies your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you have to figure out where feelings end and logic and practicality begins, and understanding how the judicial system works. I think we look at first blush, you might think that you can sway a jury's opinion, but we have to remember that the jury is constrained by case law. Mm-hmm. And where the case is tried, it also impacts who makes up the jury and
the judge.
To what effect the judge, yep. And to what effect the jurors may harbor sympathy, and who they may feel sympathy with or sympathize with.
Or they may work there.
They might. That's true too.
Yeah.
So you have to know when to fight and when not to fight. And as I always say, like, what is the purpose and the mission of the organization? Always bring yourself back to that. I think something else that's really important is that leaders have to learn to lead with imagination. Things are never really black and white.
Start with leaders have to lead with imagination, because I like that.
Yeah, I think that leaders have to, especially in this time, this moment, leaders have to lead with imagination and creativity. Everything isn't binary or either or black or white. It's very nuanced and gray, and you have to be able and comfortable in navigating that complexity. And I often find that women are better at doing this, especially women of color, because we have had to use our creativity and our imagination to overcome many different obstacles that come up against us every day. So I think in the activist world, sometimes there's like a purist kind of way of being. And like I said, looking at things as if they're binary, but oddly, things aren't. And you have to imagine something different. Imagine different than what that lawsuit handed you or your enemy handed you. Of course, they want you to say, oh, good or bad. No. What else can you imagine in that situation? And I think that is going to be being able to imagine is what's going to help us out of what we're in now and help us create a better future.
I love that. We had this theme keeps coming up. We had a very good friend, Trey Borden, who's an artist. And, we were asking him, what is the path forward? How do we fix all this? All of these institutions have been, foobarred beyond belief. And he was like, oh, I don't know. That's y'all's problem. Y'all work in politics. He was like, I'm an artist. I imagined something completely new. And it's so funny how that theme has continued to come up week after week as we're doing these interviews and having these conversations. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think it's my artsy background too. The music paid off. So
maybe there's something you said though. It's interesting. I was having a conversation with somebody about this earlier, about women and about imagination. And we were both liberal arts majors. And there is something to be said for that, pedigree or that way of thinking, because I do think it forces you, you can't color between the lines, or you can't make 1 + 1 = 2. You have to think about how can you make 1 + 1 = 3, or how can you expand the pie for everybody else. And yeah, I really hope that we start to put more value in that kind of thinking and that approach. And I think to your point around like the time we're in right now, I think people are just so scared of like the state of the world and like the unknowns around that it's become this zero-sum game. And that's very evident in our political system right now. Like, God forbid that two different groups of people could both benefit from a policy.
Well, I think this is something we've also dug into a lot with past guests on this show, just the intersection of like gender and race and power. And one thing that I think we've talked about a lot offline, and as someone who's worked with a lot of nonprofits over the years, particularly serving, minority communities and marginalized communities, but as a white woman, it's a lot of space to navigate. And one thing that I learned historically really early on is when you look back to the post-war movement, to World War II, white women sort of took these leadership roles in nonprofits as leaders, while women of color were positioned as recipients. And it wasn't because they were significantly different. It was because coming out of World War II, so many women had lost husbands that the government felt we can't have all of these, lovely white mothers going to the workforce and leaving their children at home simply because their husbands died fighting in the war. So we're going to create welfare programs. And of course, those welfare programs were available to everyone. And this sort of knee-jerk reaction was like, but not y'all, not y'all. And so we started creating all these constructs in which who could have services versus who could have entitlements. And nonprofits, even volunteer roles, were considered, qualifying work to get welfare on work. And so we sort of empowered all of white women into leadership roles in nonprofits. We didn't give those opportunities to women of color who also were single mothers.
No, Black women had to work in white women's homes. That's why, like, everybody's grandma who cleaned white women's homes. Like,
well, and it's like a long historical line of bullshit, right? Because white women got the opportunity to work respectably while gatekeeping women of color who they were serving, who were actually serving them. And so, often
and qualifying for entitlements, like you said, right?
So you have these very top-heavy organizations that the recipients, the people that actually should be voicing to power, like speaking truth to power of what's going on, are not in a leadership role. You have a non-representative leadership role. Things start to get topsy-turvy. The structure collapses around leadership. And then what do? They bring in a person, usually a woman of color. They're like, let's get us a Black woman. Come in here and talk about this. But the support isn't there. The infrastructure isn't there. And
the budget's not there.
It is not there. The budget is not there.
They don't work it. And we will get into it here. We can do a whole other episode on this, but there are studies and studies on the tokenization of people of color, and particularly Black women in workplaces, that they're sort of positioned in a failing position. Like, please come save us from ourselves. And by the way, if it doesn't work, it was also your fault, and you're welcome.
Right.
We gave you this opportunity.
It was broken already.
Yeah.
So
this was when you found it, but you made it work.
Yes.
So, I think this is so systemic across corporate structures, but it's less impactful in corporate structures because those are so large and so entrenched. And you're talking about, business to consumer and business to business products. When you're in the nonprofit world where it is so impactful and the money has to stretch and it means so much to people when it is there or it isn't there, right? It's the difference of my neighborhood has no trees. My kid has a poisonous oil well in the backyard. It is life or death. The scapegoating is so much more dramatic. And so I guess I say all of that contextually because some of those things we've talked about in the past. And obviously, as your role in the environmental space, your personal role and motivation and your leadership here, like, would just love to hear from you kind of the challenges of being a Black woman and a leader in this space, both in terms of the importance of being there, but also the challenges that, we're still seeing in the nonprofit world of people being able to fill those roles and have the structural support that they need to do that work.
Mm-hmm. And I would also just ask, because we've also talked quite a bit about boards and board composition in the past. And then I think that, plays into the conversation here as well, because you can diversify a workforce. Diversifying a board, even a nonprofit board, tends to be a lot harder.
Mm-hmm.
It is harder. And having board members that are diverse who have the experience that's commensurate with the organization is even harder to find. So there is a vast gulf between someone that runs a $2 million organization, local organization, and someone that runs a $50 million global organization.
Well, right, because if we never give women and people of color an opportunity to gain leadership skills up a ladder, and then we appoint them to a position because we need a woman or we need a person of color, we have now set them up to fail without the mentorship and without climbing the ladder and without that leadership trajectory, which is why, if you want to call them DEI or whatever programs, are so important. Because if you systematically deny opportunity and then you pluck someone up to the top to have them come in and solve all your problems you couldn't figure out, they'll do their best work, but they're doing it with the system and structures you provided them.
Handcuffs.
Yeah.
With handcuffs on.
So doing it from the standpoint of like having to have fought along the way and fix things without any support. And they're coming at that from their own vantage point, and how other people experience the systemic inequities is going to be different. But then they're asked to solve for everybody.
And so it's the advice or the support that they give or they try to give is not, again, commensurate with the complexity or the scale that you need in that moment. So then there's frustration.
Yeah.
Not seeing, it's not apples to apples.
Right.
And so.
Yeah, being sued by a major energy company. I mean, possibly millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of a judgment. Yeah, somebody who's previously been on a board that, $2 million or something like that. Yeah, they don't have maybe the proper frame of reference for what the actual risk is.
Yeah, still, they may see that organization, they may see it as discardable because you're used to a way smaller budget, and maybe your organization's reach is nowhere near as big as
another one.
Yeah. So
right.
Difficult.
And this is, when we were preparing, we talked a little bit about this. There's so many, you had a great example, I think, about Dorothy Dandridge, right? I mean, there's so many examples of when Black women will do something and achieve beyond their wildest belief, and white people will still find a way to discredit, dismantle, and, take away the work that was actually done there. And like we talked about Kamala Harris, she ran a fantastic campaign, and people told her she was exaggerating about Trump putting, troops on the streets and how tariffs would put us in a recession. And people were like super hung up on the fact that they couldn't figure out like what McDonald's she worked at, or did she really work at McDonald's, or like, just penny ante shit.
I know. I'm like, what is that really what's on your mind?
Who fucking cares? Who cares?
What do you care about?
Right. Yeah, it's a really frustrating things. And so,
you know what it is though, actually, like, because it really frustrates me whenever I hear that narrative, because one, if a man was in the same shoes or a white woman was in the same shoes, like nobody would be as up in arms. It's because they can't fathom the fact that a woman or a person who doesn't look like them, doesn't talk like them, isn't them, is in that position. Because like it is a pretty novel concept, right? Because we have not yet elevated these women, these people. so they can't wrap their brains around it. And so they have to find any possible reason other than their capability and their intellect and their work ethic for that person, because everybody else has those things. So what is it about that person?
Well, and they're familiar with how those people who look like them got there, right? They can understand that path, right? And I mean, that's why it's called unconscious bias for a reason.
They can also write off, mentally all the, again, unconscious bias. Well, this or that may have happened. Here's how I relate. I mean, the Kamala commentary is interesting, and I think it begs the question, Ebony, for you, of sort of how do some of these systemic failures in terms of particularly nonprofit leadership and political structures sort of paint the narrative of how people of color, and particularly women of color in leadership, are viewed, because they're not given the benefits of the doubt. And I will just frame it with, Kamala Harris just released a memoir coming out of the presidential election. And it's just there's one page, it's just a series of quotes of everyone she called when she was like, Joe's stepping out. I think it's me. What do we do? And, it's like Bernie yells at her, Hillary kind of, whatever. And then Gavin Newsom is like, I'm on a hike. I'll call you back. And then it's like, narrator. He did not. She did not call back. And so,
on a hike.
I'm sorry about democracy. I'm hiking right now, girl. I'll call you back. No, he did not hit her back. And so, but the narrative, of course, is she didn't do enough and she should have been this or that. And so we painted the narrative in a way where it's out of alignment with who really showed up to wrap arms around and be supportive of that campaign. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on if that's something that particularly translates into the nonprofit leadership world as well.
Definitely. I think it probably translates for us into every world that we step into, because the dynamics are the same. Madeline, as you said, I think people can't wrap their heads around someone that does not look like them, and someone that throughout history was meant to serve in a subservient role. And to see them in a role that's not subservient is kind of like, well, who do you think you are?
Yep. Jarring. Yeah.
I mean, I get that. You can see it in people's face. Like, who does she think she is? You don't have that much power. You're not able to, you shouldn't tell me what to do.
When people start talking to my 22-year-old white male intern because they cannot imagine that a Black woman would be walking around with a white male and she doesn't work for him. Then in fact, this mofo hasn't even graduated from college.
Well, we just
and you mentoring him.
Right.
Well, night before last, I was down in the Bay. I was down in Oakland for an event, and I had a couple colleagues with me for a gala. So we're dressed to the nines, but we stop at the brewery next door. So everyone else, t-shirt jeans, staff, brewery t-shirts, us, gala attire. With us is a 6'5" Black man in gala attire. And these girls come running in and they run up to him and go, "Excuse me, where's your bathroom?" And me and the other woman who's with me kind of throw ourselves in front of him and we're like, "He doesn't work here. Like, go."
Oh my God, that makes me just like, it's most cringe.
It's so I can't tell you how many times Sam has jumped in front of me and been like, "Racist, don't get conversations with her." Like, just like moved me aside because someone came at me in a like talking about how articulate I was or trying to touch my hair or some other like
hair. They love to touch our hair.
No.
Yeah, that's weird. Stop doing that. If anybody's listening, don't do that.
Well, especially not mine, y'all. It's real expensive. I'm just gonna be really, really real with you.
And
Not
it's
my
always
hair.
fabulous.
Thank you. You too, girl. You too.
Always stuff. But yeah, it's it's interesting because there's a conversation going on too around like the merits of affirmative action, and what we're talking about right now, like the reason that people get so up in arms over it is because they're like, oh, well, if you're so exceptional, then why couldn't you just get in on your own too? But then if we did let in those people at the same rates, it would have to be because the system was rigged somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And like when I'm arguing with somebody about this, because I will, it always comes back to this. And then you kind of like, gotcha.
Right. Like you're so close. You're so close.
God.
You
And
almost got it.
Almost.
Super smart.
Anyway, we could go on and on about this, but coming back to like the main topic, but everything intersects, as we've clearly made as we make clear. Ebony, when you think about like your current work and the things that you're excited about, the things that you're daunted by, tell us a bit more about that, and if you have like any sort of call to action for people who are passionate about climate justice and the issues you work on. Like, what are some things you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I am consulting. Well, first of all, I'm also an executive coach specifically for women and women of color.
We're going to have to get back on.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no textbook to tell us how to navigate these systems. There are a lot of unspoken rules, unspoken dynamics. There are
networks. Yep.
Yes, obstacles that you don't even calculate. Like you calculate, okay, I'm gonna have these. It'll be something that come out of like nowhere, and you be like, "What? Where did that come from?" And so it was important for me to ensure that other women have the support that they need, and also just a safe place to have a sounding board to ask, because I know one thing I often struggled with is if I made a decision or I said something, people would like look at me like I was crazy. And so I would have to go ask,
we're in good company.
Yeah, what was that off? Was that crazy? No, you weren't. And that does something to your psyche.
Right. And you get
when you have to constantly question yourself.
Stability.
And I wanted to create a safe space for women to come to express themselves, to share their what they're dealing with, whether it's a trauma, whether it's just an obstacle, whether it's something good, and to receive the support that they needed. And even if you need to get, critical feedback, there's a way in which it can be done that empowers the person and not seeks to dismantle them. And I don't think, and we see that a lot, even in how women in general are unsupported in the workforce.
And that is definitely like the numbers. I wish I had pulled some of these, but this is something when I was a manager at my previous company, one of the things that we discussed quite a bit was that the feedback that people of color, women of color get is by several magnitudes sharper than their white counterparts or colleagues would get. And everything is picked apart, from the way that they would address people, from little things like, the Monday morning meeting where everybody's like, oh, what'd you do on the weekend? And a lot of times, a lot of Black people, like, we don't want to talk about what we did on the weekend. And it's not because we won't talk about it, but it's because our experience, our lived experience is so very different a lot of times from our white colleagues. Like, we are talking about intergenerational issues, family members living with them, all kinds of different things, family members who might be, incarcerated, all of these things that your white colleagues just have no concept of. So no, I don't want to talk about what I did on the weekend where, me and my cousins had to go visit our uncle in jail, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, that's real. That's real.
Yeah.
That's real.
We're not trying to have that conversation. So there's so many little things that, for reasons why I think it is so important for the work that you're doing now to make sure there is that safe space, but also coach women on how to participate in the Monday morning meeting without exposing more of yourself than you really want or need to, because exposing more of yourself can also be very damaging.
Yes.
Because that is something that people then remember, like, oh, she's not like me.
Right.
I already thought she wasn't like me, but now
Yeah.
I know she's not like me.
Even further.
Yeah.
But
And
like
then suddenly you're excluded from things, so there's so many reasons why I think what you're doing now is so important. So yeah, we'd love to have you back.
Also just say, like, on the concept of mentorship, and I think it's so amazing that you're using your leadership in that way. My first personal coach was a friend of mine who had just started going to coaching, and I was like, yes, I will be guinea pig. I volunteer as tribute. But she is also a Black woman, and one of the things that she was so hard on me about was like, you're mean to yourself, and we celebrate victories. And I need you to write down at the end of every week, what did you win this week? And if it's, well, that's okay, because it's so easy to get bogged down, and particularly for people of color, and particularly for women and women of color. We got to celebrate those victories and add them up so you can go at the end of the day, no, you want to put me down, but here's what I've done, and here's who I am, and you're not going to tell me who I am. So I appreciate that, and I think just like as a, reminding people to.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I even had to go through the process of how I speak to myself. Why am I so mean to myself? Why am I so hard on myself? Why? You are allowed to learn.
because the world
You're allowed to make you're allowed to make a mistake. What? So what?
Mm-hmm.
So what? Who doesn't it? It's okay. So
Girl,
yeah,
women bankrupt companies, multiple companies, like, and still be getting CEO roles. Like, tanked a company and got a new CEO job.
And I do feel like we have to say this to each other sometimes, even just as friends, which is, don't talk about my friend that way, girl. When you talk about you.
That's right.
That's
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that makes me happy.
No, we love it. Well, no, we'd love to have you back. So let's just to touch back on the climate movement. You're no longer at Greenpeace. You have moved on, but climate is still something that is
in the climate movement. I just got back from Climate Week in New York.
Nice.
Saturday. Yes. Speaking, doing roundtables. And as I said, I'm partnering with Multicultural Leadership Initiative to build a global coalition of environmental justice leaders, because global problems require global solutions and the global majority needs to lead on it. So that's the goal right now. And if I could leave one thing with your listeners, that action that they can take, I know we say this over and over, but it really is vote. Like 80 million people did not vote last cycle. And our democracy should be the best tool that we have to protect the environment. And if you are not voting for your democracy and your environment, then don't complain. So that's the baseline.
Don't complain about anything if you're not voting.
Don't bitch vote is like a reoccurring theme.
Gil said that from Next Gen on the previous episode. If you don't vote, don't bitch. And he said it like not too.
Like Obama said, don't boo, vote.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. No, we definitely need people to re-up on that. So thank you. And, do you have any words for any of our listeners who may be in leadership positions and are, juggling, board and fiduciary pressures and organizational and budget pressures? Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah. Trust yourself. You are not crazy. You're not.
Yeah.
Don't let imposter syndrome get in the way.
Yeah.
Don't let inferiority complexes get in the way. They are set up to kind of like tear at your psyche. Blot it out. And if you need support in doing it, get a coach, get a friend, get a mentor, and make yourself speak positively to yourself.
I love that.
Trust yourself. If I could leave, trust yourself.
I love that. I love that. And I mean, especially for women and women of color, I don't care what nobody says. You don't fail up into positions as a woman of color.
No,
You don't get a bunch of fucking chances to screw things up. And then suddenly you're a VP or an SVP or a CEO. That is not an accident.
The failure is the lack of support. The failure is the lack of infrastructure. The failure is the lack of mentorship that anyone else who was a white man in the same position would have. That is the failure.
Yep.
Bars. Yep. That is bars.
Correct. I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Ebony. We'll make sure that we have your info in our show notes. So if people are interested, how can they reach out to you? If anybody just wants to shoot you a line or wants to talk to you about coaching or anything like that, how can they reach you?
So you can go to my website, which is ebonytwilleymartin.org.
Great.
Or you could send me an email at ebony@ebonytwilleymartin.org again. So it's pretty easy. It's just my name. And I'll, again, make sure you have it. But I really, really, really enjoyed this conversation. This was cathartic. So thank you.
We all need that nowadays.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for all the work and the leadership that you've done and continue to do.
Well, thank you for amplifying women's voices all over. And especially in this time, in this moment, we need community. That's how we're going to get through community. So thank you for creating it.
All right. Well, thank you, listeners. A big goodbye from me, Sam, Maddie, and our guest, Ebony, tonight. We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.